Hey, just a heads up. At one point in this recording, the sound gets a little weird and sounds kind of like distant and echoey. That only lasts for a few minutes. So if you just push through that, the sound actually gets normal again. But just wanted to give you guys a heads up about that. Enjoy the episode. Welcome to Real Life Beyond Faith, where a formerly Christian, currently atheist couple takes a deep dive into the experience of life after deconversion. This is episode 4. I'm your host, Jenica Crail.
And I'm your host, Patrick Crail.
So today we're going to actually dive into our deconversion story.
We're going to start at the point of the story where we start traveling down our deconversion path, and when we start questioning things and starting to deal with the issues and confront them.
Well, like our doubts and stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah. But first, we're going to thank our awesome first patrons.
We have Jeff Prebeg,
Justin Krebs,
Chris Watson,
Nathan Dickey,
Thomas Asanto, Rich
Kemp,
and Mark Ramsey.
You know, they tell you not to have favorites, but you guys are definitely our favorites.
Totally. So if you missed the first couple episodes where we both talked about our backstories and how we grew up in our backgrounds,
then you need to pause and go back and listen to all of those episodes. 3 episodes.
But if you also need a recap, we're going to give you a little recap.
I suppose.
Yeah. It's the nice thing.
But really stop being lazy. Just go back and listen. Just kidding. No, but for real. So we both grew up in evangelical Christian homes. We got married under the assumption that we were going to, live our lives centered around Christ.
With the ceremony more of a worship service than
an actual wedding. Yeah. So, we were both very serious about our faith and centered our relationship and our marriage around our faith. So realizing that we no longer believed at, 27 years old was kind of a big deal.
Kind of.
But we're going to back it up a little bit for you. So we first started having doubts, especially started having doubts when my brother came out as an atheist when he was 16.
But that was mainly for you. I didn't know you at that point. So.
Right. But those doubts and those questions are what got you started doubting, because those were the things that I would talk to you about.
Right.
Be like, this doesn't make any sense. Why is this the case? Like, what is the deal with hell? Like, why should you be punished for eternity for not believing in something for this short little blip of, life?
Or being born in the wrong part of the world and not knowing about Jesus, or not ever being taught about
Jesus. Or being
Jesus.
raised in a different religion.
Right.
Like, you can, according to Christian doctrine, you can live your entire life as a perfectly great human being. But if you did not believe in Jesus Christ and that he died on the cross for your sins, you go to hell and are tortured for all of eternity. I am baffled that I ever even believed it, but I did. I totally did, because that's just what I was taught. Everyone around me believed it. But now I look back, it's like, how on earth did I believe that a good God would actually do that and still be considered good and just? It's absolutely insane.
And that's all based on the whole fact of original sin. Like, even if we're good people in this life, without knowing Jesus, without accepting Jesus into your life, then you are destined destined for hell because of original sin.
Yeah, and the thing about original sin, which really made me question and really made me quite angry at God, was the fact that you are born with this sin nature that you did not choose. You don't get to choose to be perfect. You are automatically a sinful human being, but you are held responsible for that. And if you don't, believe in Jesus and turn your life over to God, for whatever reason, then you will, burn in hell or whatever. Now, there are some Christians I understand who don't believe in that form of hell. I personally did. But even if it's like a separation from God or annihilation or, whatever it is, why should a perfectly good human being not get heaven just because they were born with this nature that they had no control over? It just doesn't make any sense. And so, hell and original sin were a couple of the big questions we had for a long time. I really struggled with that. But then another big one was homosexuality. We were both working at Olive Garden, and there were several gay people there that we were great friends with.
Yeah, they were good people.
Wonderful human beings. And I had to look at their lifestyle and look down on it because of my beliefs.
And like we said in one of the previous episodes, one of those people actually went to church and was a believer.
Yeah. And I say lifestyle, but I mean, that's just what I thought at that time, that it was just like a lifestyle choice. I started to realize that it wasn't a choice when I talked to that guy who told me that he was a Christian, and he said, I know that it's wrong that I'm gay. I know that, God doesn't like it, but there's nothing I can do about it. This is who I am. If I could choose not to be gay, I would. And that's when things started to really click, this is totally not a choice for him. This is just who he is. Why would God make someone wrong? That just ties into original sin, because it's the same concept. We were born messed up in whatever way. And for gay people, they're born so messed up that it puts a permanent wall between them and God. At least that's the way I was taught. So those three things, I think, were the biggest things that I struggled with. What about you, Patrick?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think those were the biggest things for me too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, because, you and I were talking about all that stuff together. So we were both kind of grappling with the same questions and irritations.
Right. Mm-hmm. Other things came up once we started, going down that rabbit hole. But the original doubts, I think that's where they started.
Yeah, another thing that I remember really irritating me was that the Bible was so hard to understand and hard to interpret. Because I'd start reading and I'd be like, I don't know what the heck this passage is supposed to be saying. It conflicts with another passage that I just read last week. Why couldn't the God of the universe be just a tad more clear? If he was breathing these words onto the page, I feel like he could have done it a little better.
Right.
And it seems like it was just ancient guys trying to make sense of things and writing their own opinions. So that started to...
years apart from each other.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And then hand-selected.
Right, by the Roman Catholic Church, and we're supposed to trust them to know what the canon of Scripture is. This Roman Catholic Church that was completely corrupt and vile and violent. They're, horrible, horrible, horrible. And then for a minute, they, are blessed by God with the knowledge of how to make the canon of Scripture, and then they go back to being horrible. No, I doubt it.
So from our doubts, we moved on to, we didn't move on. We kind of fell into it. it was December of 2014, right?
Yeah.
Your parents called a family lunch / family meeting.
Back it up. Because before that, my dad... anyway, my dad... Because before that, my dad actually told me by myself. So we already had all these doubts, questions. I was in the phase of being like kind of angry at God. Patrick wasn't quite there. Like, he was asking the questions and stuff, but he wasn't like as pissed as I was. I think for me, it was more personal because it was my brother who I was concerned about.
Me, on the other hand, I was trying to help guide us back.
Yeah, you were trying to be like the spiritual leader and help get me back on track and stuff. Going
to church more, going to the Bible studies.
Right. Yeah, we started going to a small group, and I joined a Bible study on Wednesday mornings. But then kind of the thing that accelerated everything was when my dad came out as an atheist in December of 2014, which I talked a little bit about on one of the past episodes.
Yeah, we wanted to save the rest of it for this time.
Right. So the way it all happened is my dad had been studying and reading and looking into scripture and starting to actually look at the atheist side of things because he felt like his faith was waning and he wanted to strengthen his faith and become a better Christian and a better father and grandfather because, you know, he had kind of like drifted away from his faith a little bit. Well, that ended up in him actually losing his faith, which often happens. And I didn't even know that he was doing that, like that he was researching those things. None of us did. He kind of did it, you know, on the sly. He listens to audiobooks a lot. And so he was just like listening to audiobooks while he was doing yard work and stuff. Well, one night I was in the kitchen. We were actually living with them at the time. I was just in the kitchen and he came in and said, "So I have been doing some studying and some research for a long time, and I am a full-blown atheist at this point." And that like just totally caught me off guard. I was not expecting that. And so, you know, I handled it really well in that moment. I was like, "Oh, wow, really? Like, are you serious?" And then I was asking him some questions and we were talking a little bit and stuff. And we like went into the living room and just like sat down and he was explaining a little bit of like why he came to that conclusion and everything he was saying. I was like nodding in agreement, like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, I understand why you're questioning that and stuff. But then I went upstairs and God, I was devastated. Do you remember that, Patrick?
Yeah, I remember I was actually a little upset about that because at the time you had been struggling with depression and anxiety a little bit.
Yeah.
And then throwing that on top, it like you came upstairs and just broke down. And I was like, this is not a great time to be adding this to the mix.
Right.
But
yeah, so you were kind of like mad at Dad for bringing it up at this point because I wasn't completely like emotionally stable.
Right.
Yeah. And part of why I wasn't emotionally stable is because I was struggling so badly with my faith.
Were you still in school at that point too?
No, because that was like 6 months after Jameson was born.
Okay.
So Jameson is our second son. Our first one was born in 2012 and Jameson was born in 2014. So I was still kind of dealing with like postpartum stuff. I was working at a bar and I was starting to drink a little bit too much. And so I was just like kind of struggling in general at that point.
Yeah.
And then, you know, Dad told me that and I just fell apart. But only in front of you. Like I didn't do it in front of Dad because I didn't want him to feel bad, I guess. I don't know. Like, I wanted him to know that I still loved him and, was understanding and supportive. But I think what upset me so much was that Dad was the main reason that I was a Christian to begin with. He was my spiritual leader growing up and someone I looked up to and came to with my questions. And like, I never saw it coming. Plus there was the fact that I was concerned about his soul and what would happen to him after, like after he died. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cause at this point he's 50 years old and he seemed pretty damn sure of his conclusion. And I'm just thinking, with Nate, my brother, he has all this time to like come back to God. He was only 20 something at the time. So I wasn't like super worried about him because I thought,
Who was only 20 something?
Nate was only 20 something when Dad came out as an atheist.
Oh, okay.
So I was thinking, he still has so much time and he can come back to God. Whereas Dad, like, he's getting along in age. And what if he never does? And I started like panicking and freaking out. Like, I can't lose my dad forever. And he's like, he's been my best friend for most of my life. And I was devastated. And I was thinking like he was giving in to the lies of Satan. And I was getting like angry about that. Like, he knows better. He knows. Yeah. Why is he giving into this? And then of course there was my mom, and I was concerned about their marriage because to her, like, this was him breaking their wedding vows. They had based their marriage on their shared faith and their desire to raise their children to be good Christians in a godly household. And here Dad was breaking that promise to her. Right. So she had to really grapple with whether or not the relationship could continue as unequally yoked.
Wasn't she kind of upset too about how he brought it up to you?
She was upset that he brought it up to me, but she was also upset with the way that he told her because he just kind of blurted it out. I think he was probably at that point where he was just
fed up,
pissed.
Yeah.
Because, I think most of us go through the angry phase after we realize that, we've been believing lies and basing our life on lies our whole life. You get a little bit pissed at first, and he was in that very pissed phase. Yeah. So he just kind of dropped it on her like a bomb. And of course she was crying. And then while she was crying, he comes and drops it on me. Like, I don't blame him for doing that. Like, he was probably just fed up and ready to tell somebody and didn't want to hide it. But it was pretty devastating for us all. And then he called a family meeting. Yeah. Just a little while later, like maybe a couple of weeks. Yeah. And got, my brothers and their wives to come over, and he told us all about his conclusion. And it actually went really well. Yeah. We sat around the table for like a couple hours, just like talking about, things in the Bible that don't make sense, that we don't understand, and asking him questions, expressing our concerns.
Yeah, there were a lot of questions that day. And you could tell everyone was like kind of on edge and concerned and
right. Especially my one brother and his wife, they kind of just sat there quietly the whole time. I think he asked a question at one point, but I think she even like left the room. Yeah. At one point. They were pretty upset. I think they still are, actually. But probably not to the same degree. Yeah. It was interesting to see everybody's different reactions. Of course, my one brother, who had been an atheist his whole life, he was just like, yeah, welcome to the club. but the rest of us were all Christians.
Yeah.
So we were like trying to be understanding and supportive, but at the same time, like trying to challenge him a little bit on it. And then it was around that time that I finally decided for myself that I needed to do the same research that he did and try to find the answers to those questions.
To refute his side.
Yeah, to like find the answers he couldn't find or something and then bring them to him and hopefully help him come back to God.
Yeah, so we started with some debates between Christians.
Well, I started off by reading Bart Ehrman's book, Jesus Interrupted.
Right, but we also listened to debates and watched debates right around then too. Yeah, I started with Jesus Interrupted, though, because that was one of the books that Dad recommended. And he said to actually start with that one. And I'm glad I did, because that book took apart the Bible, like broke it down, and made me realize how unreliable it is. Well, first of all, before you even start reading that book, he gave you a warning saying, be careful if you go down this path, because...
No, he asked me, he's like, are you absolutely sure that this is what you want to do? Because you might not be too happy with the results and it could change your life.
Yeah.
It could mess with your marriage. It'll change the way you raise your children. Like, this is some pretty serious stuff. Are you sure this is the path you want to travel? And I was like, well, yeah, I have to now. Like, I'm
need to find out what it is that you found out that made you change your mind that much.
Right. Plus, I was at the point of doubting so much. And then with the bombshell of knowing that he didn't believe anymore, like, I wouldn't have been able to just keep, going along with the motions.
Keep your head down. And
right. Like, I was already having a hard time, like, worshiping at church and stuff, because I was mad and confused.
We were kind of forced to confront it.
Right.
So, and if anyone doesn't know, Bart Ehrman is the author of that book, Jesus Interrupted. And he was actually a Bible scholar at, you remember what school it was? Was it like Moody Biblical Institute or something?
I think it was Moody.
Yeah. So he was a Christian and he was trying to strengthen his faith, right?
Yeah.
So as he's doing his research, he's coming across all this stuff that is just not right.
Yeah, like all this stuff that you find out in seminary that, these pastors find out in seminary and then they don't tell their congregations, which I think is just so messed up.
This is stuff about the Bible.
Yeah, about the Bible. And now Bart Ehrman, he considers himself an agnostic. I don't even think he uses the word atheist, but he pretty much is an atheist because he doesn't believe in God.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so that was interesting to hear like little tidbits of his story too while we were reading that book. And then to have like all of this information coming all at once was just, God, it was so overwhelming.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't know any of this. I didn't know that the 4 Gospels were probably not even written by the people that they're said to be written by.
Yeah, they're just guesses.
I didn't know that a lot of the New Testament is actually considered forgeries.
A lot of Paul's stuff.
Yeah. Like, that was extremely upsetting to me. Like, it made me physically upset at times.
Yeah, like doubled over, almost throwing up.
Yeah. It was like being punched in the gut over and over again, every new bit of information.
When everything you believed your whole life is being overturned.
Right. And with the Bible,
book.
Yeah. And with the Bible, like, I believed that it was the inerrant word of God. We were Bible literalists. And here it was just being torn down. Like, and the thing is, like, if I can't trust the New Testament, how can I trust any of it. Or like if I can only trust half of the New Testament to actually be legitimately written by the people that it says they were written by, I can't.
It's hard to put your trust in the whole thing if you can't trust parts of it.
Exactly. And the whole thing is supposed to be God breathed. The whole thing is supposed to be the inerrant word of God. So if I can't trust bits of it, how do I know I can trust the other bits?
Yeah. And what bits to trust.
Yeah, exactly.
Or not trust.
So you just have to like pick and choose and cherry pick. And I don't believe in that. I mean,
that's how you get so many different religions.
Yeah, exactly. Like you do have to cherry pick to a degree just to be a Christian in the first place, because I mean, you have to, figure out your own interpretation of the Bible and like what's metaphor and what's not, what you should like take literally, like, should you really not eat pork, or is it fine? Should you not shave the sides of your face, or is it fine? There's all these things in there that it's like, well, we don't really do that anymore because we have to like, pick and choose like what's still relevant these days and stuff.
Right. Not to mention all the contradictions in the Bible that you have to figure out which one seems right or which one you believe in.
Yeah. I remember one time I was listening to a sermon by John Piper, and he said that anytime you see a contradiction in the Bible, it's a paradox. And I was like, okay, that answers it. That's fine. I didn't even understand like what he was talking about, but all I needed to know is that he had an excuse, and therefore it's fine.
Yeah. So that kind of brings me back to watching the debates. Listening to debates between Christians and atheists. And I remember we sat down and tried to watch a couple of them.
Oh my God, it was so frustrating.
And this was at the beginning where we were still trying to strengthen our faith.
Yeah, we wanted to believe. We wanted the Christian to succeed in the debate.
So we're watching these and like listening intently to the Christian debater. Whenever the Christians were asked a question, they would come up with an answer, and the whole time we're just sitting there like, what are they talking about? Like, he didn't even answer the question.
They would rephrase it as a completely different question, and then they'd answer that question. So you were left with just more questions by the time they were done. And then the atheists would get on there and make complete sense. And total sense. And we would just, it was
like, we couldn't even finish all the debates. Like, we tried to watch a couple and we couldn't even finish them because it was just so frustrating, because the Christians couldn't answer the questions and they chose not to.
Yeah. And they just sounded ridiculous.
And these were, do you remember who it was? I think it was Bart Ehrman, and it wasn't a no-name Christian. Like,
was it William Lane Craig?
No, I don't think so.
John Lennon?
John Piper? John Lennon's dead.
No, there's an apologist with the last name Lennon, I believe. I don't know. It was one of those guys. But like a highly intelligent guy. Just when it came to the apologetic arguments, we were just baffled at how bad they were.
Yeah, definitely did not help the case.
Yeah. So I went to the library and I got a large stack of Christian books, like apologetic books, and a large stack of atheist books, and started just going through and reading. Some of them I used as kind of reference books to pick out parts where it was like addressing some of my questions. Like I read about the canon of scripture, and I got some audiobooks and just poured over this information for the majority of my day every day. And I was at home during the day and working in the evening. So all day long, I just listened to books constantly and podcasts. And then in the evening went to work.
At that time too, I had just found out that I got a new job in Cincinnati. So across the state, and we had just moved into the house that we were living in. So around that same time, you would be home packing, listening to this thing, like podcasts and audiobooks while you're like packing, cleaning, and I'm at work. So there was a lot of time there for you to be able to listen to stuff.
Yeah, but by the time we moved, I was a full-blown atheist.
Right. Well, okay. We were also moving into the house, so there was a lot of stuff to like unpack and clean.
Yeah, so I had a little bit more time on my hands than usual, and I used all of that time to just fill my brain with all of the information I possibly could. That's just kind of my personality. Like when I jump into something, I jump in like wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
Like I get passionate about a certain thing and I'll just go nuts and just devour it. Like I did that when I got into like making jewelry and stuff. Like
and the rosary.
Yeah, I started studying about the rosary. Even though I wasn't Catholic, I was just like kind of intrigued by the rosary and why people pray it and stuff. So I started making my own rosaries and like making up my own prayers to pray the rosary. That was a short phase though. I've had some longer phases like, I can't think of any right now, of course, off the top of my head, but all those phases kind of like came and went. Like the jewelry making thing, like it comes and goes multiple times. But with this, it was more of a permanent, I don't want to call it an obsession, but I was just a lot more passionate about it because when I started realizing all of the things that were not true, that I had believed were true my whole life, I was starting to realize how much of it was damaging to me and how the beliefs that I had damaged the way that I thought about the world. And I was trying to undo that and reanalyze everything in my life. And in doing so, I was becoming upset. I was sad. And most of all, I was angry because I felt like my life had been completely skewed because of these beliefs. And I wanted to make sure that I did everything I could to prevent other people from having those kinds of things or from having those kinds of experiences. So if I could, tell my story and someone who's a Christian or, whatever religion is touched by it and moved to actually do their own research, it's possible I could, prevent their child from being raised with those damaging beliefs. So that's kind of what spurred me on to be an activist right away. Because I became an atheist in February of 2015. And by April of that same year, I was starting a blog. I actually named it Real Life Beyond Faith, which is where we got the name for this podcast, obviously. And I was vocal on Facebook. Like as soon as I could possibly be vocal on Facebook, I was anxious to tell like all of our family and close friends so that I could then go public with it and just like get it out there. Like, hey, listen, guys, we were wrong.
Oops.
And I had this, I don't know, like this weird idea that I would just bring people along with me. Like I would reveal to them this information about the Bible and everyone, like all of my friends would be like, oh my gosh, are you serious? I didn't realize that. And then they would do their research and everyone would just start realizing that like I was so naive. Like, I mean, I think I probably knew that wouldn't be the case, but part of me was like, how can you know this information and still believe this crap? And that was kind of my like frustrations with you at first because you were like moving through your research slower. And even though I was telling you this information, you wanted to hear it for yourself. Like you wanted to actually do the research for yourself. But I was like, dude, I just told you the New Testament is a bunch of forgeries. Like, how can you still believe this?
Yeah. And like I said in the previous episode, I wanted the decision to be mine. I wanted to come to the conclusion on my own and not under the influence of someone else.
Right. And I wanted that for you too. It was hard for me to understand how you could continue to believe even after hearing the things that I was saying. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. I was just being impatient, I think.
Yeah.
For the most part, I think I was patient. Like, I would just ask you questions and challenge certain things. And
it would just build up after little bits of time.
Yeah. And like, we would have a really great conversation where I felt like we were on the same page. And then the next night, or like a couple nights later, we'd have another conversation where I felt like you were just like digging in again to your faith. And so I'd walk away from that just like, oh my God, what if we end up on opposite sides of this? Like, what if he digs in, finds apologetic arguments that he, thinks are legit and I don't, and we're going to be always at odds with each other over this. Yeah. And I was like, I'm not raising my kids Christian. I don't care what he says. I'll take my kids and I'll get out of here. Like, you're not raising my kids Christian.
Yeah. So it
was terrifying.
That was a tricky time.
Yeah. And especially since I was going through my angry phase at that point.
Right.
Like, I was just like so pissed, and I was talking to my dad almost daily and just like, okay, so I was just thinking today, dude, I could have just had sex with my boyfriend and had it be like a wonderful experience. Instead, I like almost killed myself over the guilt of that. Oh my God. Like all of these things, like all of these flashbacks started coming through my head. I would think about, some of the things I had said to people, some of the things I had thought about people, like gay people. And I was just disturbed and mad that my brain had essentially been washed.
Yeah.
Which I know that wasn't the intention of my parents or the pastors or anybody else in my life who was influential. Like, obviously they weren't like trying to brainwash me or something. Like, they were doing what they thought was right for me.
Yeah.
Based
on
they
were raised.
Well, based on what they believed to be truth and to be the best possible way to raise me. Mm-hmm. So I don't hold anything against like my parents or anybody.
Yeah, me neither.
And that was kind of part of the frustration, is like I had all this anger, but I had nowhere to like focus it. It was just, God, I'm angry.
And that was the problem. There was nobody to be angry at. No one to direct your anger at.
Yeah. So it was kind of hard to resolve it too.
Right. So because you had anger and no one to direct it at, every once in a while it would come out.
And I'd direct it at you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because you were there and you were still a Christian. And so it was easy to look at you and be like, grr. And I was like, well, you're not the head of this household anymore. And I'm not going to be a submissive wife, because I believe that we are completely equal. Like, we were taught that we were equal but different according to the Bible, which the Bible does not teach that. We were taught that because that's like the modern understanding.
Right.
But I was starting to realize like how misogynistic the Bible was. And I was like, you can believe whatever you want, but it's not going to affect me, because I'm not going to be a biblical woman. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be a demon woman, and you're just going to have to deal with it. God, I was so pissed.
Yeah. So that definitely brought up some conflict.
Yeah.
But
plus the fact that I was still like dealing with like some of my depression and anxiety issues. Although, even though I was angry and sad, I was actually starting to feel a sense of freedom and liberation of my mind, because I had had so much cognitive dissonance for so long, and now I was feeling freed from that, which was a huge burden lifted off of me, which actually helped with my depression and anxiety significantly. And I went off of my medication and I was fine.
Yeah. So even though we did have a bit of conflict throughout it, we ended up being able to work through it. And
and there really wasn't that much conflict. Like, I hear other people tell their stories of like their relationship and how they dealt with it when one of them became an atheist. And a lot of people like fight every day and end up getting divorced or splitting up. And we really didn't have like fights. Like, I can remember maybe one or two where we actually were like raising our voices and stuff. They weren't
fights, as they were more heated discussions.
Yeah.
More passionate discussions. And
most of the time it was just really chill conversations on the couch with a glass of wine, just like talking through stuff and asking each other questions, and you know, me venting my frustrations, but you being like calm and understanding. It was really, really good to have you to talk to, because you were just so chill and so understanding. Like, even though you weren't there yet, I felt like I could tell you anything. And
because at the time I was able to listen to your concerns and your points and not necessarily take them up on my own. I was still able to, have my beliefs and listen to your ideas and try to, listen to you, but also try to figure out where that fit into my belief system, which used to be our belief system.
Right.
But I was trying to put the puzzle pieces together, and with my beliefs, hearing your side of it, the atheist side of it, I was, trying to match up those different ideas and figure out what was true for me.
Right. And if you could still believe certain aspects of Christianity, even if you didn't believe all of it.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
so certain beliefs were being brought down, but that didn't bring the whole belief system down all at once.
Yeah, like you were trying to decide if you could believe in Christianity still, even if you didn't believe the Bible.
Right.
And for me, I was like, no, you can't do that. The Bible is the center of it all. We don't have anything to base our beliefs on if the Bible isn't true, if it's not, God's word. But for you, like, you wanted to come to that conclusion on your own.
Yeah.
And it just took you a while to figure out, like, if you could, make that compromise.
Yeah, it was definitely tricky. It was a lot of internal battle. Yeah. Trying to figure out what to believe, what was right.
So what finally made it click and made you realize that you didn't believe anymore?
So I'm not really sure I can pinpoint it to one thing exactly. I think it was just a combination of everything, just building up. Certain things would fall off, like certain parts of my beliefs. Parts of information would destroy beliefs, Christian beliefs. And I would have to lose that part. And then I would find out more information. I would lose another part.
Yeah, like the morality of scriptures fell apart. And the thing about homosexuality, I think like we quickly lost that one.
Yeah. The inerrancy of the Bible.
The reliability of the Bible.
Yeah. Finding out that there's things about the Bible that I thought we knew and were certain, and turns out it's just a big question mark.
Right.
Like you mentioned, the authors of the Gospels. They are just attributed to those authors because they're educated guesses on who it might be that wrote it.
Yeah, so they could be just random dudes and not eyewitnesses at all.
Yeah.
And then realizing that the Apostle Paul was never actually an eyewitness. Like, it never really clicked with me before that he was just a guy making a claim that he had seen a vision of Jesus. We don't believe people these days who say things like that, like outlandish things about visions they've had. We assume that they've gone crazy.
And then we based a whole religion around.
Pretty much everything we believe about modern Christianity was taught by Paul. Mm-hmm. Why the heck were we believing a crazy dude?
And he wrote things that contradicted Peter, who was an eyewitness and
Allegedly,
a friend. So that part was hard to reconcile. I mean, Paul wrote a good portion of the New Testament.
Yeah. Yeah, and his letters were like the big ones.
Yeah.
That had like all the theology and Christian doctrine in them. It's just crazy to actually like back up and look at it all from an objective, skeptical eye and realize, wow, it makes absolutely no sense.
Especially if you put it in the viewpoint of current times, like put some of these stories and people into present day, and not even the fact that we have like, new technology and, we can record things and remember things, but just the things that people did. Like if we would have witnessed that today, like you said, we would consider these people crazy.
You mean like Paul's vision and all that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Abraham almost sacrificing Isaac.
Yeah. The main thing is that, I mean, even beyond like thinking that they had a mental break or something, you would just be very, very skeptical of what they were saying instead of just saying, oh yeah, he had a vision, so of course we believe him. Like,
yeah.
like, oh, his life was changed and he didn't want to kill Christians anymore, so it must be true. Well, no, like maybe he was just fed up with killing, like torturing and killing people, and finally had a mental break where he falls off of his horse and claims to see the God figure that he was torturing and killing these people for. It makes absolute sense in that regard. If that even ever happened, like we're not even sure that story even happened.
Yeah. So there were a lot of different things that added up to finally bring me to the conclusion.
Yeah. And you were calling yourself agnostic for a while.
Yeah, that was a hard leap for me to make.
From agnostic to atheist?
Well, to atheist in general, to give myself that label.
Right. But I mean, you were already calling yourself agnostic. It wasn't a very hard leap to go from Christian to agnostic?
No, it was.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Would you say it was harder to make the leap from Christian to agnostic, or harder from agnostic to atheist? It seemed like it was like a big deal to you.
Yeah.
To call yourself an atheist.
Yeah. Because I still had the lingering threats.
Yeah. You didn't want to like make it official.
Yeah. Because if I started calling myself an atheist, then it's a done deal.
Right. You had officially denied Christ.
Right. So I wanted to be sure. That was a big leap for me.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I went through all those stages pretty fast, but I went through the same like conversations in my head of, well, I'll just call myself agnostic for now because that leaves the door open and I'm not actually like denying Christ.
It's not a full commitment.
Right. I'm not like, because once I said I'm an atheist, like, that was it. I had turned my back on God.
Yeah.
And it's just more,
That's
permanent.
under the Christian mindset, though, turning your back on God.
Yeah, exactly. Like, that's obviously not what I was actually doing. All I did was realize that I couldn't believe anymore.
Right.
But I realized I couldn't believe anymore and called myself agnostic. Really, I was an atheist immediately. I just wasn't willing to accept that label right away.
Yeah.
And then that Jehovah's Witness lady came to the door and I was like, yeah, I'm an atheist. Like, oh, I am? There was kind of a realization at that point, like, oh yeah, I guess that is how I would define myself. I am an atheist, and here now I've said it out loud, so I might as well just embrace it, because that is what I am. I don't believe in a God.
Yeah. I just thought of something.
What's that?
You know what's kind of interesting? The whole deconversion process. We mentioned that you kind of go through a mourning process because you're losing, a big part of
like grieving.
who you
Is
were.
that what you mean?
Yes. Like there's, different stages. There's
Denial.
Yeah.
Bargaining.
What else? Anger.
Yeah. Depression.
Well, anyways, I went through most of those, but I think it's kind of interesting. I didn't really have my own personal phase of anger. I think that's because I kind of lived through that through you.
Right. Well, plus you're not a very angry person.
Yeah.
You're passionate, but you're not as passionate as I am.
Outwardly, at least.
Plus, I think that my beliefs had a more detrimental effect on my life than yours did on you.
Right.
I had a lot more to be angry about, especially my guilt over my sexual past and things like that.
Yeah. But I think it did definitely help to kind of work through that phase with you. So I didn't have to relive it myself and put us through that again.
Right. So how did it make you feel when I started getting more into the atheist community and doing a little bit of activism myself?
It made it more real. Like, maybe this isn't just a phase,
Right.
And again, kind of made me confront it a little bit more seriously as well.
Were you afraid I was going to push away our families and our friends?
Yeah, for sure.
I was worried about that too. And I tried to tone down my anger. But I do remember there were a couple of posts that I got confronted on, privately, from my family, a couple people in my family, even my dad.
Yeah.
Even though he was an atheist, he was like, you need to back off because you are going to ruin your relationships with your Christian family members. I was like, well, they need to know. He's like, yeah, well, what's more important to you, that they know or that you have them in your life? I'm like, oh, stop making sense. But I just felt like I needed to get this stuff off of my chest. I needed people to know that this is a messed up way to look at the world. And I didn't care if, I lost relationships over it, because I figured, well, if they can't accept me for who I am, and this is who I am now, then maybe they don't need to be in my life anyway. But it was kind of it was kind of a too dramatic, too passionate way to look at it, because when I do step back and think about it, I don't want to lose those relationships, and I can't be of any use or any good to them if I'm not in their lives. Plus, I respect that they have their own beliefs for their own reasons, just like I have my own beliefs for my own reasons. I want them to respect me and what I believe, so I have to return it. I don't respect what they believe, but I respect that it's their choice to make that decision. You know? Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I respect them as a person, not their beliefs necessarily.
Right, because they are more than their beliefs.
Right, and they don't respect my beliefs, and I wouldn't expect them to. Right. But I want them to respect me. But they still love you
and respect you, yeah.
Right. So we're actually going to bring this episode to a close, and we'll do a part 2 on our deconversion. So that'll be coming up in the next episode.
Yeah, because there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah, it was quite a process, and we want to talk a little bit more about how we supported each other through it, how our relationship was affected, what kinds of changes happened, how with like moving to a completely new city and not knowing anyone and not, wanting to find a church, obviously, how we found community and how we got involved and plugged in. So yeah, there's a lot more to talk about, more of my activism, and then, later on you joining in. Mm-hmm. Because at first you weren't really interested in activism, but you became more interested as we progressed in our journey.
Yeah. And here we are.
Yeah. And now here we are starting a podcast, both involved in the tri-state freethinkers in our area.
Yeah. Yeah, you'll want to tune in and check out what else we have to say.
So tune in next time. But in the meantime, be real. Catchphrase. Sign off. Catchphrase, sign off.